Dean missed spring practice, but my gosh, didn't slow him down on the field at all. He had one of the best single seasons any Georgia player has had. So if you're looking for a silver lining on the Darnell Washington thing, I guess better to sustain an injury prior to spring practice that takes you off for the spring than have something happen during spring, which would put you in question for the summer and therefore slow you down for the start of the season. Because that's always the thing I think we discount about some of these injuries. We have a tendency to look at this in kind of a binary sense of, are you healthy enough to play or not? But actually, especially for a player like Darnell who hopes to grow into a bigger role, when you are previously unhealthy and it's taking you off the practice field, it's taking you away from those reps, it has slowed down your development at least a little bit, presumably. Now, I won't pretend to be, fully acquainted with all of that, but you understand this, is that some of what we see in terms of, hey, is this guy healthy enough to play or not? That's kind of a yes-no question. But the unspoken subtext to all of that is, well, what's been happening for him over the course of the last few weeks, last couple of months in terms of being as ready to play and as good as he possibly could be. So it's not just about having Darnell healthy enough to play games. It's also about having Darnell healthy enough to go through the practice regimen that gives him a chance to be the best version of himself when he gets a chance to play those games. Also on the subject of Owen Condon putting his name in the transfer portal, Brian Whitehead says now Georgia's down to just 21 offensive linemen. It does seem like there are a lot of them in the program right now. Randy Hall also asking about Eric Gilbert playing tight end. Now there are all these injuries, and I think the sense you got from Kirby Smart yesterday was that maybe that's true. I'll let you hear Kirby on or Rick a little bit later on. And at least in the way now on the spring roster, Gilbert's listed as a wide receiver, but in terms of what Smart said yesterday, and you'll hear this yourself in a moment, Smart referencing the injury to Darnell as an opportunity for Gilbert, which would lead you to believe they're kind of thinking of him as a tight end right now. I guess the point is the water's a little bit muddy on that, but it sounds like the way in which Smart spoke about Gilbert a little bit different than the way that he's currently listed on that spring roster for Georgia. You can judge for yourself on that here in a moment. Big Natty Dog checks in to say buenos dias to you as well. Hope you have a day that's muy bien. Let's see what else. Big Daddy asking about Washington's injury being different from last year. The only specifics we got on that were it was called a lower leg extremity, which is a little bit of a Department of Redundancy department in that extremity kind of already means appendage or leg. So all we know it's kind of lower. You didn't get many specifics on that yesterday from Kirby. Maybe Mike knows more about that. We'll talk to him about that in a moment. We're on other platforms now: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Let me do a few more comments here on DawgNation.com as a part of our First and 15, and then we'll get rolling with the regular show after that. And when we get into the regular show today, obviously, it's very difficult to disagree with something that Kirby Smart said yesterday, and I think there's a reason why he said it. Georgia players seem to be buying in on it. However, I do think that there's at least another consideration for the attitude that needs to exist around Georgia right now that Georgia is the hunted and not the hunter, that I think we also on this show need to give a little bit of voice to about what real success looks like in college football. So we'll do that coming up in just a moment there too. West GA Dog fan says Boom was riding his group hard. That's obviously Will Muschamp, who's working with the safeties now. Tell him to stay up. He says AD burned some, so a good start to spring practice there for sure. Randy Hall says who has stood out in leadership role during the first practice. Says here's what I'm going to tell you, Randy. And obviously the official spring practice just got going yesterday, but obviously the winter workout's been going the entire time. Go listen to Nolan Smith from yesterday. Nolan Smith sounds 30. I mean, he's always been a pretty polished speaker, and sometimes charisma can be a little bit of a false positive, just to be completely honest with you. It's not always indicative of what you think that it is, but in Nolan's case, man, it's not just a charisma the way he speaks. He just speaks from the experience of years, and he was doing it last year some. He's doing it now in an even bigger way. I think that Nolan is a really interesting dude. I really do. Obviously, for what the impact he might be able to have on the football field this year, getting a chance to put a huge, maybe statistical season together. But go watch his interview on the DawgNation YouTube page. Man, it's strong. It is quite strong. So on the question of leadership, I think it begins and ends with Nolan, and we'll see who else joins him in that conversation. But I think Nolan's up there as much as anybody. I mean, the stuff that he says, if I was as a Georgia partisan and as somebody who kind of wants the game to be played a certain kind of way, I couldn't write him a better script than the one that he expresses off the cuff. I am very impressed with him. Very impressed with him. Thomas T-Bone 86 says, hello, Brandon. Go Dogs. You there as well. Ohio Dog. Good morning to all of you there, too. So really good stuff. So we're on all the video platforms. Good morning to everybody there. Mike Griffith coming up. A little Georgia practice talk with him. A little bit of Pro Day preview coming up there as well. That should be good times. And I thought there was something very interesting about Mike White's introduction yesterday that I want to make sure we address before the show is done, but a lot of football before we get there. Kirby on Eric Gilbert. Kirby on what it means to defend a national championship. Maybe being different than some of us assume, and I'll have a little bit of a retort back to that. I think it's a good football conversation off the top of the program here today, and I'm happy to have you as a part of it with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by our friends at Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to talk about a movie for like 2 seconds, and that's going to be a setup for, I think, what's currently going on with Georgia football. A lot of you remember like the early 2000s, there was like a poker craze. Remember this? Like when poker got really, really popular, early 2000s. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that a movie from around that same time, Rounders, I think a lot of folks thought that movie with like, say, Ed Norton, Matt Damon, John Malkovich, looking back, that movie was a part of the poker craze. But what's actually kind of interesting is that the movie Rounders actually predates the poker craze. When Rounders was in the theaters late 90s, poker was not that big of a deal. It was not really that big a part of the pop culture. I'm talking about generally speaking. There are obviously folks that like poker, but poker was nowhere near as big in the culture as it became. Rounders actually one of the reasons that it became so popular. Now, here's where I'm going with all this. In the movie Rounders, and I love it, many of you do there as well, especially if you're around my age, there's a line that Matt Damon has in the movie. And I'm not going to get this exactly right because I'm never perfect when quoting these movies, but it always sticks out to me that he's arguing with his girlfriend, played by Gretchen Mol, one of the worst sports movie girlfriends of all time. Most people would kind of agree with that in terms of just the wet blanket that she was on his life. But the point is he's arguing back and forth with her, and he gets mad at her and says, listen, you still keep thinking this game is about luck. He's talking about poker. He says, if it's luck, why does the same small handful of people end up at the final table at the World Series of Poker each and every year? In other words, hey, the best players are always the last ones playing. If that's the case, then it can't be luck. Now, what's ironic about that is that in part because of Rounders, that actually stopped being true for the World Series of Poker eventually. That you started getting more and more people in there. You had amateur win the thing. All of a sudden, it became such a crowded field that a lot more randomness was entered into the event, the World Series of Poker. But when Matt Damon said what he said, it was absolutely true. That I don't care how much luck you think is involved in poker, the same people are competing for the championship each and every year. That bracelet, that big prize, the World Series of Poker. So it can't be that much about luck. Now, my point in saying all of that is that college football right now operates very much the way the World Series of Poker used to, the one that Matt Damon described in the movie Rounders, in that somehow, some way, even though the individual games can seem somewhat random, and good luck, bad luck seems to play a role in a lot of the ways in which the season unfolds, when you get to the final table, which in our sport we call the college football playoff, it just sort of seems like the same teams each and every year. That I don't care how much luck seems to exist in a given moment, in the totality of the event, it just sort of seems like it's the same ones at the final table. It's been Alabama, it's been Clemson, it's been Ohio State, and now Georgia fans kind of also hope that it's Georgia. And so I really think for a college football coach, Kirby Smart in particular, I think you've got to kind of understand that as your job. It is your job, as they say in poker, to be sitting at that final table with a chip and a chair, a spot at the table with a stack in front of you with a chance to win. And listen, for a professional poker player, even when you get dealt bad cards, there's a chance you're going to lose because you have very little control over how those cards kind of play out for you. But your job is just to be at the final table and give yourself a chance. And so as we move into the 2022 season for Georgia, which in my mind kind of always unofficially begins with the start of spring practice, that is also true for Georgia right now. The subject came up yesterday when Kirby Smart gave his introductory press conference and with some of the things that Georgia players had to say about the notion of defending a national championship. You hear me use that phrase a lot. It's always been kind of a part of the sports conversation. Okay, Georgia's the reigning national champion. They begin their defense of that title here with the start of spring practice. That's just kind of the narrative that gets cast sometimes. And Kirby Smart said something very interesting yesterday about the idea of not really liking that phrase, not really liking the notion of so-called defending a national championship. What Smart said about this was kind of interesting, and in light of what I said a moment ago, I think it sets us up for a pretty interesting conversation, too. This is Kirby from yesterday.
When we came back and went to work for those 6 weeks, we've put that to the side. We're not communicating, talking about that. That's something they'll be able to have the rest of their life. We always talk about it here. We've talked about it since we won the SEC. You don't defend a title. You guys want it to be that way, but that's not what we do. We start afresh, just like we would when we lost to Texas in a bowl game. We start completely new, and that's so hard, I think, for the media to grasp that. It's not hard for us because we go into a different part of the program, which is the off-season conditioning program. What's different about the off-season conditioning program than what it has been in the past? Not a whole lot. We're doing the same things we did to build up to the point we went to last year. We certainly have different faces and different people in the places. And I think, they're right where they need to be. They're not like way behind schedule. They're not way ahead of schedule. We have holes to fill just like we do every year, probably just more this year than in years past based on the guys leaving and the departure.
So Kirby Smart does not like the idea of defending a national championship, essentially saying this current Georgia team hasn't done anything yet. And if somehow Georgia doesn't win the national championship in 2022, it doesn't mean – like Nick Saban actually said something very similar the other day. In professional wrestling or in boxing, the champ defends the title. If you lose, they take it from you. But what Smart's insinuating here is actually very similar to something that Saban said the other day, which is, hey, if the next team doesn't, quote-unquote, defend the title, that doesn't mean the 2021 team is no longer national champion. This isn't pro wrestling where the champ loses the title and has to give it to somebody else. You can never take the 2021 national championship away, which is what Smart's kind of insinuating here. And the 2022 team is starting to work on its own legacy. Guys in bigger roles, guys in more prominent situations, that the 2022 season belongs to these guys. It's actually not a continuation of what happened in 2021. That's kind of what Smart's saying there. And one of the key leaders on this team, maybe the key leader on this team, at least based on everything that he said yesterday, so poignant and so profound, may be Nolan Smith. And it sounds like Nolan in that role is certainly amplifying that message from Kirby Smart, because when he spoke in his own press conference, he kind of said something similar. This also Nolan Smith.
That's everything. Like, people are still asking questions about, we defending the title. It's not we're defending a title. We're going to win another one. And that's the mindset that you got to have. You don't defend anything. So I feel like, we take it as a responsibility and go out there and just give it our best every day and take it one day at a time. Just like we did last year. We didn't look forward. We didn't look behind. We just kept taking it one day at a time.
So let me just say this. Based on what Nolan Smith says there, hey, this is our chance to win our own national championship. Kirby Smart saying what he said, hey, this is not about defending a title. The 2021 season ended. The 2022 season is starting. That's kind of what you would expect Georgia coaches and players to say. And from their perspective, that's probably a necessary mindset. That just makes sense to me. However, for us as fans here for a moment, let's have a slightly different conversation. And let's talk about, and I realize why Kirby can't say it this way, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about what does it actually mean to defend a national championship. Now, it's going to sound like I'm settling when I say this or expecting less than the best, and I'm not, and hopefully you understand that. I don't necessarily think defending a national championship means coming back and winning another national championship. That's not what I think it necessarily means. Now, I obviously hope Georgia does that, and I think that Georgia this upcoming season has a good chance of repeating as national champions. But you don't have to win the title again to necessarily offer a good defense of your national championship. Think about defense in terms of how you would argue for yourself if you were a defendant in court. You're making the case for yourself. How Georgia plays in 2022, I think in large measure, can make the case for what it also did there in 2021. To go back to the analogy I used about the same folks being at the same table at the end of the World Series of Poker each and every year, the way that Matt Damon once described in Rounders, that's kind of what Georgia's job is right now. To say that not only are we national champions, but we are ever-present contenders for that national championship. And ultimately, as strange as this might sound, I think what comes next for Georgia is actually harder than what came before. And I even said this before Georgia won its national championship. I think that we have, and I don't just mean we as Georgia fans, I mean we as just kind of sports fans in general, we have this obsession with winning a championship. But I truly believe that maintaining a consistent presence as a championship contender is actually a more difficult thing to do. And so Georgia being back in the college football playoff, for instance, being, as Matt Damon would say, one of those guys, that final table once again, giving yourself another chance to win that title here this year, that to me is a very worthy defense of that national championship and the kind of signal that Georgia is going to be a thorn in the side of all the other would-be contenders for many years to come. And if you don't believe me in discussing how hard this actually is to do, keep in mind this for a moment. Think about recent SEC national champions that were nowhere to be found shortly after winning that title. Let's start with LSU in 2019. Maybe one of the greatest teams of all time, but the coach who led them to that title is gone now. He's essentially fired, and LSU is a far cry in 2020 and 2021 from what it was in its title season of 2019. Not the only SEC team for whom that's true. Think about Auburn in 2010. Auburn fans have been craving a national championship for such a long time. Finally got it in 2010. Within a couple of years later, the head coach who led them to that title, Gene Chizik, was run out of town there as well. Even a program like Florida, which maybe in this era had more consistent success, when they won the national title in 2008, by the following year, they couldn't even win the SEC, and by the year after that, Urban Meyer was also on his way out of a job. Now, I'm not suggesting that Kirby Smart's 2 years removed from losing his job at Georgia. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is defending a national championship for teams here in the SEC and what we think of as kind of the modern era, that's actually proven itself not to be that easy of a thing to do. So the real work for Georgia begins right now. Even in this college football playoff era, these teams that have consistently found their way into the playoff have found it hard to do that each and every year. Look at Clemson this past season. Clemson had been in every playoff since 2015, but this past year, not a playoff-worthy team. Even a team like Alabama, who's been in all the playoffs but one in 2019, gave up nearly 50 points twice and found itself eliminated from playoff consideration. Even they have found it hard to be a true playoff team each and every year. So think about the great programs in college football's past. Think about Bobby Bowden at Florida State if you want to go back to the 90s. Think about what Nick Saban is doing at Alabama right now. There's clearly the presence of national championships that validates that success, but the most interesting, most difficult to accomplish feat for those programs in those particular eras was the way in which they showed up each and every year, something that not every national champion has been able to do. So even though Kirby Smart can't give voice to this, and even though Nolan Smith can't give voice to this, and other Georgia players can't give voice to this, that's really what's at stake for Georgia. Okay, you won the title, but can you stay at the final table? You won the title, but what do you got next? What is your defense of your performance in 2021? Are you going to prove yourself to be a consistent contender this year and many years to come, giving yourself more chances to win more titles along the way? That's the real hard work, and it's not as easy as it seems because replicating success in college football always proves to be more difficult than some assume it's going to be. That's the task facing Georgia right now, and it seems like on the basis of what Kirby and the players said yesterday, it's a task they're taking very seriously. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 1st and 15, starting 9:45. First, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, of course, radio noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And as a podcast, wherever you find them, the Apple Player, the Google Player, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com, we post the show each and every day. We're just happy you connect with us however you get to us, and we really appreciate Breda Pest Management being a part of our program today. It's really fun to be in business with Breda, in a relationship here with them as a proud partner of ours, and also to tell their story, because not only are they supporting DawgNation Daily, something I'm very grateful of, as a fan of Georgia, I also like the way in which Breda Pest Management supports UGA. They've been the official pest control of UGA athletics for a while now. That means they're taking care of a lot of the athletic facilities that you have there at Sanford Stadium, or I should say there at UGA, including Sanford Stadium. And if they're doing that kind of work for UGA, you better believe they're going to do great work for you there as well. Because think about that field at Sanford Stadium for a moment. On a playing surface that size, there's room for about 1 million termites. That's how small and minuscule these termites can be. And they're so small you can't see them, but you better believe you can see the impact of having them when it comes to your house. And listen, here in Georgia, that's just a fact. If you haven't had them, you will have them eventually. That's just kind of the way that it goes. That's why you've got to have a great pest management company for you that helps protect your home. And it's not just the bugs, it's the critters there as well. Sometimes you may find a company that does one, not the other, but Breda Pest Management can do all that for you. Talk about flying squirrels, things like that. Do you know how horrified I am about the possibility of having to go in an attic and find one of those things? Well, that's what Breda Pest Management can help you deal with. They aren't horrified by that. They take that challenge head on, and they can do the same thing for you there as well. They've been around since 1975. They got over 125 people working for them, helping cover you and your home, and we know how important that is, so please make sure you find them. It's bredapest.com. That's the website. Now, for those of you listening radio podcast, let me explain. Breda is spelled B-R-E-D-A. It's bredapest.com, the official pest service for UGA, our good friends here at DawgNation Daily. Great pest management services they're providing from you. It's good to have them as a part of our program today. All right, we'll get Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment from Athens. Side of Pro Day today. Obviously, spring practice getting kicked off yesterday, so a lot going on with the Dogs right now, and we are covering all of that with you. Before that, though, I want to go briefly around the doghouse, and I want to look at something that Kirby Smart had to say yesterday, which is kind of a follow-up to a conversation we've had on the show now for the last couple of days. Going back to last Thursday, Terrence Edwards kind of broke the news for us that, yes, Eric Gilbert would be going through Georgia spring practice. That was the indication that he was getting. Kirby Smart confirmed that there at spring practice yesterday. But in doing so, Smart, as you would expect, and I think rightly so in this case, also echoing some of the things that Terrence Edwards, the mentor of Eric Gilbert, has said on our show, really kind of trying to compartmentalize the Gilbert conversation. Yes, it's good to have him back on the practice field. Smart obviously confirming that yesterday, but also a very wide-eyed look at the challenges that come with playing big-time college sports when you have the spotlight that Gilbert's had on him. We obviously know that a so-called personal issue took him off the field a year ago, and it seems like that everybody here just wants to be very careful with the next steps as Gilbert works his way back towards being a contributing member of this football team. This is a little longer clip than we would normally play from Smart, but it's that good. I think it's both hopeful in terms of those of us who love cheering for Eric, but also a reminder of the job of a coach that's more than just X's and O's, Jimmy's and Joe's, giving yourself the best chance of winning. You got to help these guys win at life as well. And I thought Smart struck the right balance and all that yesterday. This is Kirby.
Yeah, Eric's done a great job kind of integrating back to the team. He's been here for a while now. He's done the work we've asked of him. He's doing well academically. I think there's this perception, and it affects college football athletes more than anybody else because they're younger, that this recruiting stigma follows someone and these expectations follow kids. And I look across and follow guys that maybe we signed here or signed somewhere else, and they carry this really heavy burden of expectation. We don't place that burden on anybody. I think sometimes they put it on themselves. I think sometimes social media does it. I think sometimes media in general do it. But for whatever reason, Eric's a guy that's carried a lot of that burden with him in terms of expectation. Our expectation of Eric is to be the best person he can be first and foremost, and hopefully be the best player he can be. He's had a really good offseason. He continues to work. But that doesn't put an expectation of this guy's going to go out there and set the world on fire. He's trying to figure out where he fits in, and he's working really hard. He's done everything we've asked. He's fortunate he's going to get a lot of reps because of the two guys we have out. So he's going to get a lot of reps. Rylan Godey's going to get a lot of reps. Brett Seither's going to get a lot of reps. Delp's going to get a lot of reps. So we've got guys that are going to take reps in those roles at tight end. But I think sometimes the expectation's so great on these kids it can affect them psychologically.
Georgia fans are astute. They don't miss anything. And while Gilbert is listed on the spring roster for Georgia as a wide receiver, a lot of Georgia fans pointing out that in that particular case, Smart treats him as a tight end, which is kind of interesting from a from a player standpoint of maybe how Georgia sees his role right now. We'll find out if future statements echo that same sentiment, but that's what Smart kind of did yesterday. So a lot of Georgia fans pointed that out. However, the other thing that Smart says there, I just think is so true and so right. And listen, you don't have to tell me. I already know this. We're guilty of this around here. Of course we make a big deal out of these 5-star recruits, and of course we make heroes out of them. Now, in defense of us, if there was no such thing as a 5-star label, a guy like Eric Gilbert would still live with a lot of athletic pressure to perform because of how he looks. I mean, that's really what a 5-star athlete is. It's someone who is easily recognizable as an athlete, even in a room full of athletes. That's, to quote Coach 30 here, that's the actual athlete. It's like you can just look at him and sort of tell, right? And so even if there was no label that we put on these kids, his own body type is his label in that particular case. So there's going to be a little bit of pressure to perform, related to that. However, what Smart says there, which is so true, is that the greatest gift that you can give any of these players is a chance to no longer be that. And at Georgia, because there are so many talented players on the roster and because everybody's kind of got their own recruiting accolades, you don't have to be Eric Gilbert, former 5-star, anymore. You don't have to be that. You just have to be you get to be a football player, just like the 84 other, or based on recent scholarship counts, 91 other, or however many players Georgia was thought to have had on its roster at one point in time. There's obviously a very deep roster of very talented guys, and you just get to be one of them. You don't have to be the guy that for years I was saying that you were on this show, because that is a lot to live with. And whether it be someone who steps away from the football field, or maybe someone who's just tempted to that we never know about, it is a lot of pressure. And a good coaching staff allows you to take a break from being that, take a vacation from being that, and just enjoy the game and just play the game. And I do think that Smart does a pretty good job of that with what he says there. And based on the stuff that Terrence Edwards said last Thursday, and by the way, I think you need to go back and listen to all of that in light of what Kirby Smart says there, it sounds like everybody who's close to Gilbert's trying to allow him to do that. Take it slow. Let's celebrate small wins here. Let's don't fixate on the big win of, he's going to be the focal point of an offensive game plan. He's going to go out and do all these things. No, participating in practice is a win. Seeing him on G-Day, for those of us who crave that chance, that's a win. Being a contributing member of this team come September, that's a win. And anything after that is a big win. We'll get to that eventually. But celebrating small wins here seems like the right thing to do. And I think Kirby Smart's words yesterday allow us the chance to do that. All right, we are busy. Later on, there was the thing that I noticed yesterday when Georgia introduced its new basketball coach. I want to find out from you if you kind of noticed the same thing, and I want to kind of find out from you if you think it means the same thing that I think it means. We'll talk about that then. There is a story that I'm going to tell you later on that has nothing to do with Georgia, but it's going to make Georgia fans really, really mad. I don't bring it up to intentionally troll you, but you do need to know about it. So we'll do that coming up in a couple of minutes there as well. But Pro Day today. Spring practice yesterday, injuries, everything else. It's a lot to do right now. Our buddy Mike Griffith helps stay on top of all of it. He helps us stay on top of all of it. So let's talk to him right now. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot to talk to with Mike Griffith here. Georgia beginning spring practice yesterday, Pro Day today. Another chance probably to hear from Kirby Smart there too, so maybe a little bit more fallout from the start of spring practice, even as the future pros at the NFL level take center stage. Mike, I guess there's a lot of places we could begin. Let me just bring up something, though, that I haven't talked about much yet. In addition to everything else from yesterday, also pretty long list of dogs unavailable here during spring practice. I guess the most prominent name was Darnell Washington, the guy who unfortunately had a lot of his season a year ago taken away from injury. What do you think about, Darnell not healthy enough to go through spring right now, and just kind of the injury situation all around for Georgia as it was reported by Kirby yesterday?
Yeah, I think Darnell's probably the most concerning. I mean, Brock Bowers probably is the key, but I think we've known for a while Brock wasn't going to go. But Darnell's a guy you're trying to kind of re-recruit. He's a guy you're trying to retain. I don't think it's a secret. He's got one foot out the door. And you were hoping that he could get some reps and work into the offense. It'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds. Kirby described it as a lower leg extremity. So I'm not exactly sure what that is. But that was definitely the most surprising, I believe, of the injuries. Arian Smith, disappointing. He's not ready to go will do some things. I mean, you think about how explosive he is. Maybe the fastest man in college football, BA, right there at Georgia. And you hope Arian Smith gets healthy soon. Barry Alexander, incoming freshman, we've heard and read a lot about. Some great reporting from Jeff Sentel, and we find out he's got a lat injury, won't go through spring. And, that's one of the areas you're really looking for, Georgia to bolster is that defensive line where you lose, 3 potential first-round NFL draft picks. My goodness. So, those were the key injuries. I thought that and what I make of it is, as Kirby said, every year you expect to have 6 or 7 guys that have those off-season surgeries. And, of course, this year with 19 midterm enrollees, just a mind-numbing number. And 5 of those kids are having surgeries as well. So the number's a little up from that perspective, but Kirby didn't sound panicked by it. I think he looked at it as an opportunity for other guys. You mentioned Eric Gilbert, who came in wanting to play receiver, right? It didn't work out. He didn't have a good start, and now maybe at tight end, where a lot of people envision that he might fit best, especially now that you see just how productive that position can be in a Todd Monken offense.
Yeah, I think just we're to the point now where, whether it be Gilbert lining up over there or, anybody, I just sort of view this as a lot more positionless than I used to. I think in the NFL, you're seeing kind of the growth of like the positionless defender where you just get out there in space and you make a play. And in college football, I think the very best offenses are kind of gravitating that direction, themselves where, how many wide receivers in the SEC last year were better than Brock Bowers? I would argue that there was only one for sure and maybe only 2. So you can call him a tight end, but I don't know that there were more than a couple of receivers that last year in the SEC that actually outplayed Brock Bowers. So ultimately, what you label someone at their position, Mike, I'm just not really sure it matters as much anymore. But the thing that you're bringing up is also something that Georgia fans brought up there as well, which was with Smart's words yesterday, he was definitely including Gilbert in that group of guys we think of as tight ends, the Scythers, the Goaties, the obviously, the Delps and the Bowers, and not the receivers, the Karrases and the guys like that. He was definitely kind of including Gilbert back in that group again, which was obviously more of his natural position going back to high school.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's a great observation. You look in the NFL and you hear guys' names like, George Kittle and Travis Kelce, and, who cares what position they play? They get open. They're tough matchups, and you can move them around, and we saw that with Brock Bowers. Really more of an H-back almost felt like BA, the way they put him in motion, even handed off to him a couple of times. And to your point, Brock was he was the freshman All-American. He was named by 2 different organizations, not just the one I run. Sean Alexander, working out there with the Maxwell, he named him his freshman All-American too. And I don't think the folks at Ohio State were too happy about that. They had a pretty good quarterback. I say beat Michigan maybe next time. But, Bowers was, the preeminent freshman in the country. He was an All-American. He's the only Georgia skill position player to be first or second team. You look around, there wasn't anybody else playing quarterback, running back, wide receiver. There's no other Bulldogs first or second team All-SEC. Just Brock Bowers. So to your point, Monken's offense is built in a way that he can get the ball to his playmakers, whether it's Bowers, whether it was James Cook, that did a lot of good things. Probably a guy maybe deserves some recognition. James will catch some passes today at the receiver position at Pro Day, by the way. But, you see a guy like Monken, and he's creative enough to find a way to get the ball to the best players. And if Eric Gilbert is one of those guys, then he's going to get the ball. It's that simple. Whether whatever drama we want to put on it, whether I believe a lot of it was self-induced, quite frankly. I don't blame the media. I don't blame the fans. There were some things that happened that Eric Gilbert brought on himself. But to Kirby's point, I don't think anybody here is going to dwell on that. This is a championship football program. There's plenty of other star players that we're looking at. It's not the Eric Gilbert watch. Nothing's on his shoulders. I expect bigger things from A.D. Mitchell and Ladd McConkey. They showed me a lot. And Brock Bowers, to your point. I think this backfield's going to be better than last year's. I really do. I think Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton have more of a Chubb Michelle look about them, to me, than the last battery. And that's no offense to the last battery. I just think these guys are both really, really good. And this offensive line, by the way, I believe will also be better. So there's plenty of other things to talk about, and I think other things that will be talked about.
Yeah, certainly, and I want to get to the pro day stuff in a minute because that obviously begins here for Georgia. But you've also got a report up at DawgNation.com right now, new information on JT Daniels and a visit that he's got coming up. Mike, what can you tell us about the next step here for JT Daniels as he looks for a new college home?
Well, Missouri was the first school to call JT when he went in the portal. Eli Drinkwitz was the first phone call. I mean, that day, quite literally. And, if you're JT Daniels, and this is where I think some people go astray. Oh, well, it's Missouri and it's Oregon State and it's West Virginia and maybe Notre Dame, and those aren't the world beaters. It's not about world beaters. It's about finding an offense that you feel comfortable in. It's about an offense that allows you to run, fly the jet from the line of scrimmage. That's what JT does well. What he does really well, and we saw it here at Georgia, is that pre-snap read, and we know he makes all the throws. That's what he does well. And he wants an offense where he's going to have that sort of control. And so, when these schools are recruiting him, that's what he's looking for. It's the right fit. Now, he wants to win games. They believe Oregon State could be a contender in the Pac-12. They bring back a lot of guys. They have a really good offense. Sure, it feels and seems like the end of the earth to me. But, if he thinks he can lead Oregon State to a 10-win season and compete in the Pac-12 and it's the perfect offense, then good for him. I don't know what Drink and Missouri has. Missouri to me is always the joker in the deck. I just don't know what we're going to get from Missouri from games. I mean, some days they beat Florida and they take Georgia in the fourth quarter, and other days they lose to teams, and you wonder what's going on. I never know what to expect from a school that, ironically enough, is in the show me state. But we know they want JT Daniels to show them what he's all about this weekend, and so he'll take a visit there. I think West Virginia's on the map, right? Former USC coordinators there. Mountaineers very aggressive. I understand they have very strong NIL packages going out there, a lot of booster money. JT may not be the only big fish in the pond they're fishing for. You could see West Virginia with some heavy duty NIL transfers, and then Notre Dame. You just don't know about Notre Dame. They've got a couple young quarterbacks. They want to sort things out, and let's see where they're at. Maybe they'll have interest in JT Daniels after spring drills. But JT can't go anywhere anyway. So until then, so he's going to measure things. He's talking to a lot of different teams. He's talking to a lot of players all over the country. He was in that Under Armour U.S. Army All-American game. So he's got a lot of people, a lot of 4 and 5 stars that he kind of grew up with when he was winning National Player of the Year honors out there in California. That he's networking right now, and Missouri's just the next stop. So we'll see how Missouri goes this week. We know Oregon State's in the book. We know he likes Oregon State. We'll see what Drinkwitz and Missouri have to say, and we'll see if West Virginia comes to the table. We'll see where Notre Dame is, and could there be another school out there that has a quarterback situation and they just don't know it yet. A lot of these things don't get determined until spring. I look at Georgia, and I keep thinking and waiting that Georgia needs to add somebody through the portal, right? But as Connor and I did the math last night on Connor and coverage, I think Georgia would have to get rid of like 10 or 11 more guys before they can start adding. So this whole portal free agency stuff, it's absolutely head spinning. And to your point, not necessarily what we signed up for as college football enthusiasts. But circling back, Missouri, the next stop for JT Daniels.
Well, it's been interesting following, because I like the SEC, so I'm following SEC storylines, even the ones that don't necessarily involve Georgia. And it's been interesting to follow Eli Drinkwitz this spring. They started spring practice pretty early. They've been going now for a while, where he seems to want to have it both ways. Where he acknowledged a couple of times that they'd considered taking a transfer quarterback, and obviously there'd been potential of being connected to JT Daniels, obviously. And your report now, confirms that. But at the same time, he's trying to engage in a quarterback competition with the guys they currently have in their roster. They also have a pretty impressive freshman out of the state of Georgia who's going to arrive there eventually too. But it's just kind of interesting that for a guy like Drinkwitz, he wants to keep the quarterbacks that he has happy, but he's obviously been open to the possibility of taking a transfer quarterback. Even speaking about that it's an interesting time to be a coach where nobody seems to want to put all their eggs in any one basket. It doesn't seem like.
Well, I think to your point, Georgia the same way. Stetson Bennett, Todd Monken says he's the starter, but Caleb Williams is a guy Georgia was chasing in the portal. So everybody wants it both ways, and it's the nature of the game. These coaches, you can never have enough great players. right? You never have enough. That's why I never, bought the theory when people say, oh, well, he's recruiting good enough. He doesn't need an extra home game. You can never recruit good enough. You can never have enough good players. I mean, listen to Nick Saban. I don't think Nick Saban, Brandon, meant for that little video to get out where he was talking about 3 players not being prepared and costing Alabama. I think that happened. I was told, talking to some Alabama beat writers at the Combine, that actually happened at a coaching clinic. And Nick had no idea that was going out. I guarantee he wasn't very happy about that. But the point was well made. You're never deep enough. And you hear Kirby even saying it yesterday. He said, look, I'm not crying about it. I'm here to coach it. I'm here to fix it. But, Georgia has some deficiencies at positions, and it's going to be real interesting to see how many more dogs go in the portal. Owen Condon announcing yesterday that he's going to not a surprise. I mean, he started against Arkansas in 2020, and he just kind of disappeared after that, right? Warren McClendon kind of took over, and Condon sees the forest for the trees. Luke leaving, Stacey Searles coming in. You would have thought maybe that would have represented a fresh start, but not so. And so he's out. But there's going to be other guys, like we said, they're 11 over. I mean, Georgia's got to have some of these other guys leave. They don't have the scholarship for all the people that are on the roster. And I would bet you that probably a decent percentage of players that were on that injury list that we saw released yesterday from Coach Smart are going to be among the transfers that are going to be elsewhere.
So Pro Day is today, and I've had a chance to attend these things before, and I find them to be fascinating from the standpoint of I didn't play the game. I never pretend to be a scout. That's not my shtick. But when you watch these things happen, it's hard not to come away knowing more about football, watching the kinds of things that the true scouts, the actual professionals, the NFL level, are trying to identify in players, and just seeing in very up close and personal situation just how athletic these Georgia players are, or like any major college player. If you've seen a situation like that, you truly are blown away by the athleticism. So to me, it's a fascinating display of football talent. But in terms of specifically what's going to happen today and kind of, what it means for the Georgia players, you were obviously in Indianapolis, that next opportunity. And for some guys, they'll do more than they did in Indianapolis. Some guys may do less. But just give me a little bit of a preview of Pro Day.
Yeah, if I'm Jordan Davis, I'm in a bubble somewhere. I don't want anybody near Jordan Davis. I mean, he ran that 4.78 BA. I want to put him in a glass case on ice. I mean, geez, what a speaking of amazing performances, and you just want to give Jordan Davis. I mean, that was truly one of the best combine performances in history. I don't know if people really realize just how special of a combine and some people don't get excited about it. That's fine. That's fine. It doesn't. That's not their cup of tea. But to your point, knowing how hard these athletes work, and knowing what great athletes, and not just football, they're not just guys out there bashing heads. Okay, these are world-class athletes in many senses. You find me another 340-pound, and I'm not going to go on a Shane Beamer rant, although you should have Carvel dig that up in hindsight. That Beamer rant after the game was one of the best moments in Georgia football history when the guy said, "What are they doing out there to make it hard on you?" He starts talking about how many 5-stars they've got and and they've got a guy that runs better, a 340-pound guy that runs better than anybody on this teleconference. He said it was just class, and that's what it's like watching Georgia Pro Day. That's what it's like going and watching Georgia at the Combine. And even Kirby Smart yesterday, and I'll give Kirby credit. I shot Kirby a text from the Combine, and I said, your guys are killing it in these interviews. And because some of these guys we hadn't really heard speak before or speak at length. I mean, I don't know how much of Devontae Wyatt you'd ever really heard. I hadn't heard much. My goodness, was he entertaining. And listening to Lewis Seen, I mean, you wanted to draft him just off the conversation, and then Lewis runs that 4.37 and goes 36 in the vertical. I mean, the Georgia players represented themselves so incredibly well, better than any school in recent memory. And even Kirby acknowledged the interviews. Typically, he doesn't say anything about media interviews. If it doesn't help him win a championship, right, he doesn't spend much time on it. But I think he recognized the advertisement that those young men had for the University of Georgia. And Brandon, he attributed it, and I give him credit, he attributed it to a skull session. He said, these guys have gotten comfortable talking more about themselves because of the skull session. And he thinks that's translated. And if that's the case, then bravo and more of it. Because, number one, we saw how it helped them deal with the adversity of the embarrassment of losing the SEC championship game in the fashion they did. And to me, that loss was twofold. One, a blessing. Okay, one, we got to see the true character of what 2021 national champion Georgia was. If they didn't just waltz over the field, okay? They got their butts kicked. They got embarrassed in front of 80% of the stadium that were Dog fans. But rather than go away and look forward to the end, these guys rallied and dominated Michigan. I mean, just pulverized. That game, they could have scored 50 or 60 if they wanted. And then they came back and the defense just stoned Bryce Young. One touchdown pass from that kid. And one touchdown and the guy was inside the 36. So we got to watch that team respond to adversity, right? And then two, losing to Alabama. There's something. The guys talking yesterday, they said, look, we're not the SEC champs. We got some unfinished business. You won the national championship, although Kirby made it very clear, don't call them the defending champs. He said, no, you guys, we're not defending anything. This is a new season, right? I go, okay, we got it, coach. This is pop psychology there. But the players looking at it like, hey, we want to win the SEC. So to me, you even go back and you find this silver lining, and circling it back again to the pro day, the character, the leadership, Brandon, one final time for these guys to compete as dogs inside the house of pain before what's going to be this glorious NFL draft that Kirby Smart is going to just love, because all these recruits are going to be watching, and you're going to see 4 or 5, maybe 6 dogs going across the stage, maybe 7 the first 2 days of the draft, maybe 4 or 5 in the first round, and really signaling a new era as Georgia football is taking its place atop the SEC.
Mike, thank you for being here. Very interesting stuff. I know you have a lot of coverage from Pro Day today. I think we may even hear from Kirby again today at Pro Day, so maybe some more spring news coming out today too. So we'll look forward to all of that, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Thanks, Brandon.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Very interesting stuff from Mike Griffith there. Of course, Mike going to be on hand with us for the very first ever cruise with DawgNation coming up really just a few weeks. Your time to get involved on that right now with our friends at Royal Caribbean. Listen, we cannot wait to be doing this with you. It's going to be such a good time, and I know Mike's excited about it. Jeff Santel going to be there as well, just hanging out. You get a chance to cruise with all of us. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm pretty fun to be with on a cruise. Jeff and Mike, I don't know. Me, I'm definitely fun to hang out with, and we're going to be all hanging out together on the Independence of the Seas with our friends at Royal Caribbean. So much fun visiting Nassau in the Bahamas. I was actually just in Nassau. Such a cool place to be. So many fun things to do there. We had a great snorkeling adventure there. You can go to Paradise Island. You can do some really, really cool stuff. Just a really, really extraordinary experience. Perfect day, Coco Cay. You've heard me talk about that a lot, but also taking advantage of fun things on the ship. In fact, if you're watching a video, you just saw the sky pad. It's a really cool thing. It's like a bungee cord type activity with a trampoline, but you can also put like the virtual reality goggles on if you want to do that and kind of have that experience. It's on the ship. It's just a cool thing to do. You got the water slides, of course, there as well. Just an incredible, extraordinary experience when you're on a great ship like Independence of the Seas, eating specialty restaurants, Chops Grill. You've heard me talk about that. Azumi, the hibachi restaurant. There's a Playmaker sports bar. I've actually never eaten at the Playmakers. I was on Harmony of the Seas recently, and it did not have the Playmakers, but Independence of the Seas does, and so I got a chance to enjoy that for the first time. If you're watching a video, you just saw Perfect Day, Coco Cay. Look at that. I mean, that's Perfect Day right there. That is unbelievable experience. I know if you're not watching a video, don't see that, but a truly unbelievable experience right there with our friends at Royal Caribbean. Your chance to be a part of it. DawgNation.com, the place to go. Right there at the top, a link for you to be a part of the very first ever cruise with DawgNation, but you got to act fast. We're really running out of time. We're leaving April 25th from Port Canaveral, going to Nassau, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay on Independence of the Seas, so it's creeping up on us. You better be there and be a part of that. All right, a couple of things coming up before we're done. A little bit of a look at the new Georgia basketball coach, Mike White. Also, a big chance, speaking of basketball, for you to be a big winner courtesy of our friends at Kroger. I'm going to tell you about that coming up before we're done on today's show there as well. Before that, though, as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, are you ready to be mad about something? I think you're going to be mad about this, and I'm not saying this to troll you, but I just want you to be aware of it. There was a release from USC they got some attention yesterday. I'm going to read this straight from their website. Is that USC spring football game is going to be broadcast live on ESPN. Now listen to this. It will be the only spring football game airing live on ESPN in 2022. Matt Berry, Kirk Herbstreit, Joey Galloway, Molly McGrath are going to be on the call. So this is going to get you mad, at least a lot of you, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the thing that was started a year ago is continuing. That ESPN is reducing its coverage of spring games. That as recently as, like, say, 2019, that's the last year pre-pandemic, every SEC game was on television. I think every SEC game was on television. Most of them were on the SEC network, and at least one of them was on regular ESPN. And in 2019, it might have been Georgia, but either way, they were all on television. It sounds like ESPN is continuing what it did last year, which is with reduced coverage of spring football games. Now, that doesn't mean they won't be on the SEC network. Well, I guess we'll wait and find out about that. But certainly the release from USC would suggest there's going to be a lot more digital media coverage of spring games, which for some people is no different than anything else because they watch everything digitally. For some people, that's a little bit frustrating because, and even I'm kind of like this, where it's like if you're watching TV, you can use your remote and kind of click from one thing to the next. But if you go into like a digital platform, Disney Plus, Netflix, something like that, you have to click into it and then click out of it to go watch something else. It's a lot more difficult to channel surf on, like, say, a streaming platform than it is a television platform. I think the NFL is going to deal with that when they go streaming for their Thursday night game coming up this fall, but that's a different point for a different day. Some people aren't going to be happy with a streamed spring game again for UGA, and this release from USC would at least make that sound like it's a possibility. But beyond that, there's this, and this is the real outrage. And listen, I'm not trying to be performatively angry about this, but I do find this to be a little bit frustrating. That for the last few years, ESPN has selected one team to get the big stage, to have their spring game on ESPN. And this year, ESPN's choosing USC. Now, I get this for three reasons. The biggest of which is this. The powers that be want all 50 states to matter in college football. And you better believe they want a big market like Los Angeles to matter. Los Angeles is a town that sneakily cares about college football a pretty good bit. USC is way more. It's a little bit like Atlanta, where, like, you know, Georgia is the biggest football brand in our city. It's a bigger football brand than Atlanta Falcons is. It's the same thing is true in LA there as well. USC is a bigger brand than the Rams or the Chargers. Rams just played in the Super Bowl. But that city probably moves to the beat of USC more so than it does the Rams. Anybody from Southern California, I think, would essentially tell you the same thing is true. And so if you're ESPN, there is money to be made by cultivating that Los Angeles college football culture. So that's probably the biggest reason why, if you have an excuse to put them on the spring game, that's what you'll do. But beyond that, there's the buzz that's created by Lincoln Riley moving over as head coach. There's the buzz created by Caleb Williams transferring as quarterback. But as I've told you before, I think that college football is in a dangerous spot if it's chasing the kind of off-season buzz narrative, off-season buzz storyline. At one point in time on the show, I described that as the NBA-ification of college football, where all of a sudden the off-season moves become more interesting to some people than the on-season, in-season results. Georgia, as the reigning national champion, is not treated as that kind of thing right now because people are, ooh, look at Alabama and the transfers, or ooh, look at, you know, Brian Kelly going to LSU, or look at Lincoln Riley going to USC and bringing Caleb Williams with him. Never mind that in a lot of the games late last year, Caleb Williams was struggling to complete 50% of his passes, and never mind that the big reason why Lincoln Riley is in LA is because he wanted no part of the SEC. He essentially ran from the stiffest competition that he would have been able to find. Never mind all of that. It's buzz. It's Lincoln Riley, and you see how cool his house is, and Colin Cowherd saying good things about him. If that's what college football is doing, chasing buzz, I think it's making a huge mistake. I've told you before. I think Spencer Rattler at South Carolina has a better year than Caleb Williams, and I don't know that Lincoln Riley greatly changes the fortunes of USC from where it was a year ago, which was a team with a losing record. Riley's clearly a good coach, but he's not good enough to win playoff games. He had a million chances to do that at Oklahoma and never did. So congratulations on your buzz. My guess is it doesn't work out to the tune of very much in terms of on-field success, but frankly, ESPN doesn't seem to be too bothered by that right now. Then there's this, Anthony Richardson speaking yesterday at Florida spring practice about the start of the Billy Napier era. I'll try to find the quote that he had. I had it pulled up a minute ago. Let me see if I can pull this back up. And I think all of this kind of leads to a question. Yeah, here's the Richardson quote. Let me find this. So he's just kind of talking about, how things are getting going with him thus far, saying about the arrival, 24/7 has the quote that it's different with Billy Napier. He says, before we even started installing plays, he would meet up a little just to understand the terminology and understand the process of things. They're coaching us hard. They're moving fast. We have to pick up things like this. And quotes like that from Richardson obviously sound a lot like what you hear from a lot of players anytime a new coach is introduced. And I think here's the question. And listen, obviously I'm a Gator hater, and I want Billy Napier to fall flat on his face, and I think it's funny that he looks like Sling Blade, and everything else that everybody else says, I'm right there with you on all that. However, I don't deny that Napier's been a good coach at the Group of 5 level, but as we said yesterday, when it comes to like Brian Harsin, also Group of 5 guy that graduates up to the SEC, everybody who ever goes from Group of 5 to SEC, of course they're going to have a sterling record, otherwise they wouldn't get the job. But some of them, once they take the big step forward, is the Peter principle, where everybody eventually graduates to a level of incompetence. For a lot of these guys, the Group of 5, they're going to work their way up to a level where they just aren't quite fit. They're not quite cut out for the job. And people would say, and maybe even rightly so, I would say I'd probably be more likely to believe this, that Napier's chances of succeeding at Florida are greater than Harsin's chances of succeeding at Auburn, because while Harsin, much like Napier, was a good Group of 5 coach, prior to that, Napier had plenty of connections to the SEC, having worked with Nick Saban, having spent time in this league, understanding what that's all about, coaching within the SEC footprint, even at Louisiana Lafayette. But you're also left to wonder about this. Well, LSU was never hiring Billy Napier. They were never 1,000 chances to hire anybody they wanted. Napier was not going to be their guy. This is either one of two things. This is either total runaway ego, not having enough guts and bravery to admit that a coach in Louisiana, a lesser program than LSU, was worthy of the LSU job. It's either a runaway train of ego, or it's proximity to a guy to know something that other folks should have known. When it comes to Billy Napier at Florida, we're going to find that out. Is his previous ties to the SEC the kind of thing that makes him a safer bet than the typical Group of 5 coach would be? Or did LSU know all along that he's not big enough to be in this role? We're going to find out pretty quickly. It sounds like Anthony Richardson's enjoying some of what he's seeing from him right now, but that's kind of what's at stake here. It will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I'm going to do Mike White, Georgia basketball in a moment, but speaking of basketball, I want to tell you a really cool thing that's going on with our friends at Kroger right now. We're calling this Fuel for an Upset. Now, the reason why I'm calling this Fuel for an Upset is because at Kroger, that is the place to go for fuel right now. I mean, because let's face it, it is expensive. And anytime you get a good chance there and earn the extra fuel points and all the things that go along with that, of course, that's what you're going to want to do. Kroger, just the place to go for your fuel in your vehicle right now, because anything we can do to make that a little bit cheaper, a little bit less expensive, obviously that's what we want to do. And earning those extra fuel points at Kroger is obviously a big part of all of that. That is the place to go. Now, we're also thinking the upcoming very big tournament, which you are very well aware of, and Kroger is a big fan of all that too. And the thing we love celebrating this time of year are the upsets, especially those of us who don't have our team in the tournament, which is obviously Georgia. And so I think you're like me a lot. It's like, okay, where's the big upset going to come from? And some of you think you know. I haven't filled out my bracket yet because I'm the last one to do everything. But a lot of you already have, and that's kind of the fun thing that you do is, hey, on the first day of the first round, here's my upset that I'm looking for. Next day, here's what I'm looking for. Moving on to the next weekend, here are the upsets that I'm looking for. And we're going to give you a chance to make really yourself a big winner on the basis of simply being able to pick an upset. So let me try to explain this. What's at stake here? 4 different chances to win on 4 different days. A gift card pack from Kroger worth $200. Now, here's how you're going to do this. We're going to do it this Thursday, which is tomorrow, and then Friday, and then we're going to do it next Thursday, next Friday. So think about this. It's day 1 and day 2 of kind of the regular first round, and then the start of the following weekend, next weekend on Thursday and Friday. So it's Thursday and Friday this week, Thursday and Friday next week. And here's all you got to do. You simply have to send an email to info@DawgNation.com. That's info@DawgNation.com with your pick for an upset for that day. That means send an email for the games being played tomorrow, send an email for the games being played on Friday. We're going to pick a winner for tomorrow, we're going to pick a winner on Friday. It's an upset, and then do the same thing next Thursday, next Friday. Now, here's the definition of an upset. We're not using point spreads. That's a different thing for a different thing. This is simply the seeding. If a 16 beats a 1, that's an upset. If a 9 beats an 8, regardless of who's favored, if the 9 seed beats the 8 seed, that's an upset. 11 over a 6, 12 over a 5, which happens a lot. 14s over 3s happens a pretty good bit. Now, you don't get extra points for picking the big upset, but if you get it right, you get it right. So we are simply going to get your information on the email. We are going to get your upset, and we're going to draw a winner. And that winner gets a chance to win a $200 pack of gift cards. That's a $100 Kroger gift card. You can use that on some great stuff. A $50 REI gift card and a $50 Home Depot gift card. How great is that? $200 worth of gift cards, $100 to Kroger, $50 to REI and Home Depot. We're going to pick a winner for tomorrow, pick a winner for Friday, then next Thursday and Friday. It could not be easier. Simply pick your upset for that day. Give us your contact information. Email it to info@DawgNation.com. It is our Kroger Fuel for an Upset pick. Hopefully that makes sense because I think it's pretty simple, straightforward. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. But basically, just send your upset to info@DawgNation.com, and you could be a big winner courtesy of Kroger. Now, with that said, let me transition to a different basketball story for a moment, which is the announcement of Mike White as Georgia's coach and introduced yesterday. And it was an event there at Stegman Coliseum. White came across, I thought, as a pretty gracious guy during all of this. He has been described as having kind of a engaging personality. I think that he put that on display pretty well yesterday. I'll give you a brief taste of some of what he said from inside Stegman Coliseum yesterday about the decision to uproot his family and bring them within the SEC to the University of Georgia. This is Mike White from yesterday.
To move a family, and if the perception of this community wasn't what it was, if the feeling that we get walking around this community and meeting with a bunch of the Bulldogs, if that feeling wasn't what it was, we wouldn't be here. This is a family place, and we're proud to be a part of this family.
If you're watching on video, you see the photo of White right there. I got to tell you, the very sharp gray suit. You see the working buttons down there at the sleeve. That's a sign of good craftsmanship. But the red and black tie, that is a big upgrade over the orange and blue. I'm going to tell you that right now. White looking pretty good. Get the dog lapel going on there. So pretty good stuff all the way around from the new basketball coach, Mike White. Two things for me on this. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but in light of what we were just saying a moment ago about Billy Napier and Brian Harsin, former Group of 5 coaches in the SEC, by hiring a guy like Mike White, and this is one of the reasons why I'm selling myself on this hire. And listen, I'm under no obligation to do this. If I thought the White hire was terrible, I'm not going to get fired for saying that. Like, I don't work for Georgia. Like there's no obligation for me to carry water for anybody on this. But speaking as a fan who was a little lukewarm about this when it was first announced, underwhelmed, I think is probably a phrase that I probably used with some people privately, starting to talk myself into it a little bit more. And part of the reason for that is because had you gone like the Matt McMahon, Colorado State coach, Cleveland State coach, had Georgia gone with its own version of Group of 5, then you run the risk of that being Brian Harsin. You run the risk of that being someone who was great at his level, but not so great at your level. And in the case of Mike White, you seem to take that kind of unmitigated disaster off the table. With all due respect, I think the same thing's true in the comparison between White and Jonas Hayes there as well. And listen, I think that Jonas could have a very bright coaching future. There's no doubt there's a lot to like about him, but if it's a binary choice between Jonas and White, my choice in this would be the guy that had the head coaching experience, the guy that's won NCAA tournament games. It doesn't give me great pleasure to say this, but I mean, White has won a lot of tournament games, especially by what has been sort of a typical Georgia standard. So from that standpoint, it becomes a little easier to sell on Mike White, and I kind of find myself being a little more talked into it, especially when the thought is that he doesn't like delusional Florida fans. Well, that sells me on him even more, to be frank. But here's the other thing, and this is really the main takeaway I wanted to have here for a moment. The thing that I noticed yesterday, and I don't know if you noticed this, but I feel like I did, and I don't know if page view metrics bear this out. Frankly, they probably don't. And I don't know if video view metrics bear this out. Frankly, they probably don't. But still, the general sense that I get is that the basketball news, the announcement of White, kind of held its own yesterday a little bit in the shadow of Georgia spring football practice beginning. What I mean is that, listen, I'm a busy guy. I'm running around doing a bunch of stuff. I'm not a beat reporter. I'm not, I'm not in attendance for either of the press conferences yesterday. But in a day in which there was a lot of Kirby Smart news on my social media feed and probably on yours there as well, I actually saw people talking about Mike White too. And I saw a lot of response from Georgia fans about the introduction of White and kind of how they feel about all of this, that the announcement of a Georgia basketball coach yesterday did not get completely overshadowed, did not get completely dwarfed, did not get completely swallowed up by the start of spring football practice. I'm not going to tell you that they were equally popular because they weren't. As I said before, we have 1,000 metrics that show you how not true that is. But it did kind of hold its own. It wasn't completely ignored, even in light of everything going on with football, which could be a good sign here. There does seem to be a little bit of enthusiasm right now, maybe not about Mike White in particular, just to be frank, but enthusiasm in general about Georgia joining what is a great time for basketball in the SEC. This league has tremendously improved itself in recent seasons. Right now, the SEC is a better basketball league than the ACC is. And years ago, that would have been impossible to foresee, but it seems to be true right now. And Georgia fans simply want to be a part of that. They may not know right now if Mike White can lead them there, but they are sure they want to be there, which is probably a step in the right direction. So, successful press conference for him yesterday. Georgia fans seem to have a pretty nice response to it all, and the White era now begins at UGA, and obviously around here we certainly wish him well as he tries to get the Dogs back into the NCAA tournament. All right, Golden Shoe today takes a little bit of explanation. So 99.9% of the people who watch or listen to the show, certainly almost all the people who listen to the show, but those who watch the show do so later than live. This is an on-demand product for the overwhelming majority of the people who consume it. However, we do have a live audience, and they love arguing with each other. And on YouTube, we have an Alabama fan who's pretty famous, who may surprise you to hear this, but I actually like him. He comes in there, he kind of stirs up the football conversation. Everybody has a good time, and they go back and forth. And so I was asked to talk some trash to this guy from one of our guys, so I'll do this as a part of our Golden Shoe today. One of the common arguments involves running backs and who's had better running backs, Georgia or Alabama, or our buddy Frankie Fibonacci wanted to give a shout-out to a guy known as G. Grace, but some success for Nick Chubb. First running back in NFL history to average at least 5 yards on 100-plus carries in each of his first 4 seasons, so great success for him. And Frankie Fibonacci kind of making fun of one of our Bama fans about that. So Golden Shoe to Chubb for that achievement. By the way, he may get himself a new quarterback in Cleveland, too, which could be good news for him. And also Frankie, a regular contributor of ours, will make him a Golden Shoe winner there as well. Talk some lousy, stinking Gators earlier, about 4,815 days since they've won a national championship. Remember off the top of the program, the notion of defending a title by remaining a contender? Florida ain't done that. And I use bad grammar intentionally. They haven't done that at all. And they're losing to Georgia again, coming up 227 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Great to have all of you with us. Great to have our friends at R.S. Andrews here. And great to have them out there on that wall for us when it comes to your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, electric needs. A lot of you need air conditioning and heating the same day right now. Well, guess what? All those systems can be tuned back up to factory fresh specs by simply checking out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. All right. So can I just say one thing about something that has nothing to do with Georgia football? And I'll promise we'll take a bunch of your comments. Did the Braves do Freddie Freeman wrong? I mean, like there's a Joel Sherman report out there that that Freddie was not made aware of the Matt Olson trade, and it almost seems like by making that move, it seems like Freeman's free agency opportunity was totally undercut. Now, it's not the Braves' job to help Freeman get a better contract, but I don't know. Something about this seems really, and I've reached out to some people about this, and apparently some people don't seem to see this the way that I do. This is a little bit of a drive-by take for me. I have to admit that because I'm obviously way more plugged into what's happening with Georgia football than I am Braves baseball. But something about the Freeman thing right now to me seems a little bit weird. And I don't know if you think that or not, but if you do, feel free to weigh in on that. On the topic of Georgia football, though, for now, Let's do some YouTubes first because I've kind of gotten into YouTube a little late here last few days. Let's give them the first crack at the apple here today, or bite of the apple, whatever you want to call it. Anthony White says, I'm not a UGA basketball fan, but hopefully they will do well. And so here's the thing I've wondered, Anthony, and I mean this sincerely. I've always kind of wondered, like, what is Georgia's possibility to win over new fans? And I just don't really know. I don't know that I know the answer to that. I really don't. For instance, like, there is clearly a pretty big Auburn bandwagon around their team that didn't used to exist, and that's not me making fun. It's just true. I mean, Auburn basketball was irrelevant for most of my life, and now Auburn fans are really behind their team. Like, if Georgia was really good at basketball, like, how would that change the feelings of the average fan who, I mean, like, the one thing that we know I think in the pre-digital age, there was an assumption by, like, what you might think of as, like, traditional media types that the Georgia football fan stopped cheering for his football team come January and started cheering for his basketball team. And in the digital media age, we kind of find out, no, that's not actually so true, that a Georgia football fan is not necessarily a Georgia basketball fan. Now, maybe every Georgia basketball fan is a Georgia football fan, but the inverse is not necessarily true. Like, what is Georgia's opportunity to win new fans? Like, I remember being there Tubby era. I was going to pretty much every game in the Tubby era and pretty much going to every home game in the Jim Herrick era there as well. And, like, those games in Stegman Coliseum were really fun. Place was sold out. Students were getting there early. It was really fun, but it did not necessarily move to the casual fan very much. I'm not saying Anthony's a casual fan. I'm saying, but to, like, the average fan, maybe that's the better word than casual. Like, it's not like the average Georgia fan living down in Macon was just living and dying with every dribble of Georgia basketball. There was a pocket of Georgia fans that wouldn't miss the games, but you get the impression it just wasn't that large of a number. Like, what is Georgia's chances? Because, I mean, the Georgia fan base in general is about 1 million strong. I mean, it's at least 1 million strong, if not bigger than that. There are at least 1 million Georgia fans. So how many of those could be converted to basketball fans? I honestly don't know the answer to that. Very funny from Baggins and Friends here. Let's see what else. Chase Spitzer says, I feel like Freddie Freeman had his mind made up a year ago and is trying to go home to California. You may be right about that, Chase. I won't pretend to be an expert, but that is not the sense that I get. It's really not. It's not the sense that I get. But you may be right. Jim McLaughlin says, winning draws the fans. It's that simple. And Jim, you may be right. But I get the impression there's at least a possibility, and I'm not trying to be negative, I'm just trying to be honest. I'm trying to explain to you what I mean. I get the impression that winning would be really, really fun for those that like Georgia basketball, but I am somewhat unconvinced that winning would bring a whole bunch of new people into Georgia basketball. I hope that you're right about that because, listen, I'd love to have more permission to talk more Georgia basketball because I love college basketball, at least I used to. I mean, I was a pretty big, like, bracketology type guy and who should be in and who's on the bubble. Like, I think that college basketball is actually a pretty fun sport to follow when you have a good reason to follow it. And I'd love to believe, hey, all they got to do is win. They're going to have plenty of fans. But as I said before, I don't know that when Georgia was winning, it had a group of very intense fans, but I don't know how much that fandom was really growing because Tubby Smith got them to the Sweet 16 and actually, I mean, came with an eyelash to get to the Elite Eight because Syracuse beat them at the buzzer that year. Let's see what else. Green Soldier says, I can't wait for us to have our offense humming along and defense still being a top 4 or 5 unit and hearing about how we'll pull an LSU, LOL. So the point about the defense there is kind of an interesting one. I was actually on the morning show with 960 The Ref this morning, and I made a point. I told you yesterday that there are a lot of people who simply just don't think that Georgia's defense is going to be anywhere near what the defense was a year ago. And I think that in a lot of ways, that can set up a bit of a false narrative. In other words, I do think it matters how the Georgia players view themselves in all of this. Like, what do they think about no one, air quotes here, no one, certainly large numbers of the national media, no one thinking that you're going to take the baton from the 2021 defense? What do you plan on doing about that? However, beyond that, I think it's important to understand what the stated goal actually should be. Georgia's defensive goal in 2022 is not being as good as the 2021 defense was. It's being as good as they need to be in 2022. That the standard is not best of all time. The standard is as good as you need to be, which, as Green Soldier says, maybe that's top 4, top 5 defense in the country. Like, you don't have to be number one in every category across the board to be the best. In fact, go look at truly great athletes. Think about Jerry Rice. Think about Michael Jordan. Think about Tiger Woods even. Across the board, there are plenty of individual areas when that guy wasn't the best. Rice was never the fastest. Michael Jordan was never the biggest. Tiger Woods in these individual golfing statistical categories, there was almost always at least one person better than him in every category. It's the sum total of all those categories that add up to true excellence. And then for Georgia, it's the same way. Go back and look a year ago. Think about, to me, this is a very simple way of thinking about college football. There's offensive and defensive efficiency. How well you perform offensively, how well you perform defensively. And I think last year, for the most part, there were only 2 teams in the top 10 in both categories for most of the year, Georgia and Alabama. Georgia was actually the only team in the top 5 of both those categories for most of last season, and that was the recipe for a national championship. For the most part, you have a lot of would-be contenders that are really great in one area and nowhere, and not even good in another category. Ohio State, great offensively, terrible defensively. Oklahoma, that's been kind of their recipe for quite some time. At one point in time, you want to go back to 2019, Georgia best defense in the country then too, but nowhere near the best offense. They didn't have an offense that complemented what they did defensively. So the issue here is being as good as you can in as many areas as you can, and that's what adds up to actual excellence. And I think the Green Soldier brings up a pretty good point. Robert Barnes says defense may not start out where it was, but they'll be there when the time comes, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about there as well. This is also interesting. DMart42 says, do you really think the Falcons can actually go after Deshaun Watson? I know the cap is fictional, but we need picks and players with a god-awful roster. So that's a lot to unpack there, and I think that it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And DMart, on the one hand, is right. Like, the Falcons' roster situation is wretched. But I think the bigger issue for the team is that no one in Atlanta cares about them. Right now, the Atlanta Falcons are irrelevant. Braves are defending world champions. Hawks have Trae Young. That's a beloved superstar in our town, for those of you who live in the Atlanta area. Georgia's the reigning football national champion. By comparison, the Falcons have nothing. They have nothing. And this is more than just being a bad team. This is being a team that right now doesn't elicit any passion. People are just tired of Matt Ryan. Had a great career. People are done with him. They are tired of that. Arthur Smith hasn't really introduced himself to this town yet as a head coach. Kyle Pitts had a really good rookie season, but I think it maybe took a little while to get going, didn't really catch touchdowns. I don't know that Kyle Pitts has taken over this town the way that certainly like a previous young Falcon would have, like, say, maybe Julio Jones or someone like that. The Falcons need an identity. So I think a bad Falcon team with a more interesting identity is just better right now. And so if you could make the trade for Deshaun Watson, I think you need to do it, because I think you need – it's why I would have drafted Justin Fields a year ago, or why I would have, if you hold on to the number 8 pick, draft a dog like Trayvon Walker this year. They just need an identity locally, and that's what Deshaun Watson would provide. And, yeah, giving up a big haul for him makes it more difficult to fill other roster spots, but – you got to matter. And right now, Atlanta, just as an organization, could not matter less. Deshaun Watson would change that. Now, the flip side is this. It sounds like the Falcons' pitch to Watson is going to be, hey, come home. Obviously he's from Gainesville. To be totally honest, I'm a Gainesvillian myself, Hall County native, and so a little bit of a soft spot for Deshaun because of that. I'll admit that. But that's their pitch to him in comparison to other places that Watson may seek, a landing spot at. Cleveland, somewhere like that. Hey, this is the place you can come home. He's had a long relationship with the Falcons, going back to like ball boy days, and obviously a connection with former Falcon work done through Habitat for Humanity and all that kind of stuff. And that's part of their pitch, which, if you think about some of the things that Watson's been accused of in his personal life, a chance to come back to a place where he's got a little bit of extra, what's the word I'm looking for here? The Watson name just means more in the state of Georgia. It just means more in that Falcons community because he is a locally beloved, former hero. Even Clemson's only about an hour or so from Atlanta, so you got that little Clemson bleed over. They'd be kind of happy to help welcome him in, I think, too, to a certain degree. So if Watson's looking for his own PR reboot right now, a place like Atlanta where they're just more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt on some things, that might make some sense for him there too. Foster Moss says that Sean Watt's going to have to throw the ball to himself. Yeah, that's a different issue. But, in just simple terms, I am very much in favor of Atlanta going out and trying to acquire Deshaun Watson. Quarterback's by far is far from the only issue they have. But if you could do it, I'd want to do it. I would. Over here on Facebook for a moment. Matt Rukavina says Falcons have to cough up multiple first-round picks. The curse of a Bill O'Brien would continue. Take it from this Houstonian. So there you go on that front. Ken Feinberg says Falcons should just trade everybody and draft the UGA defense, which is not a bad idea in its own right. Ryan Walker says no matter what, I'm just going to be pulling for the Falcons, and I'm right there with you too. It's just a different level of engagement with the Falcons and the rest of the sports fans in Atlanta compared to most of the other sports franchises around here. Aisha Murphy kind of weighing on the same thing there. Claude Phillip White said, if the Falcons do not take one of those dogs with that 8th pick, I am out. So Claude putting it out there in no uncertain terms. Bill Sanders says nobody cares about them because they're abysmal. Build back a better team and the fans will come back. Could be true. Bill Sanders on the subject of Freddie Freeman, he says, I think his age played a big part in his negotiations. It's not his fault for his birthday, but sports numbers speak for you do. I was still an usher at Turner when he debuted in 05 as a minor. So I understand where you're coming from. But I mentioned this. I was on with my friends at 92.9 The Game yesterday, and I mentioned this. I think sports fans' awareness of contract issues and kind of age benchmarks in baseball, that's become a very big topic of what does a so-and-so guy do and at the age of 30, whatever. I think that extra knowledge has taken the emotion out of sports fans. And to me, the most troubling aspect of the Freddie Freeman conversation among us, the fans here, is the lack of emotion associated with that. And I'll be completely honest with you. I think the lack of emotion here is serving to give ownership a free pass. I don't just mean Liberty Media, although I think that a healthy skepticism of Liberty Media's stewardship of the Braves is probably a good thing. I just mean sports ownership in general. This notion of, well, at the age of blah, 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 like I know Freeman, I think it's one like a 6-year deal. What is it like in age 5 or year 5, year 6 of that contract? My response is I don't mean to be flippant here, nor do I mean to be naive, but my response is I don't care. I don't care. I mean, rich people overpay for things all the time. In this particular case, why not overpay on the back end of a deal for Freddie Freeman? Because if he performs as well as he could, the final years take care of itself. And if you had the choice of having a productive season for first baseman, would you prefer it be Freddie Freeman or a younger Matt Olson, who's kind of the new guy coming in? No disrespect to Olson, but my preference would be Freddie Freeman, even if it's more expensive, because Freeman's kind of been that guy. And I don't think there's anything wrong. In fact, I think it's healthy and good to let that emotion be part of the conversation. Because here's what it almost seems like to me, is that what you want sports to be are like franchises like the Braves and the Dodgers acting as adversaries fighting over an asset, which is in this case a free agent first baseman. What actually ends up seeming like is the Braves and Dodgers are allies fighting against their true adversary, which is an aging player with high salary demands. And that's where I think baseball gets itself in some trouble. But my baseball takes are probably not what you came here for. Joel Moody bringing up Pete Maravich as the GOAT college basketball player. So the story I always heard was that maybe somebody else even mentioned this. Maybe Keith Folds brought this up. Supposedly Maravich came to Athens and had such a good game, and maybe Keith brought this up. I can't see his quote, but I know that Joel was responding to him, that Georgia students carried Maravich off the court. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the story that I've heard. That's how good Maravich was. Moose James says, we lost to Tech last night in softball. I hate to hear that. A little bit of a tough time in the spring sports against Georgia Tech here. Hugh Nash says, I'm a Freddie fan, but I'm a Braves fan first. If Freddie isn't going to sign, then we need to take action. Olson's a big get. Atlanta native, great defensive player. Numbers were actually better than Freeman's last year, and he's still 5 years younger. Yeah, there's a lot to like about Matt Olson. No disputing that for me whatsoever. I don't know, man. I think the response to Freeman leaving is maybe a little different than I thought it would be, maybe think it should be. I really do. Because this is not the NFL. This is not a salary cap league. This is not a thing where, I mean, if and when the Matt Ryan era comes to an end, obviously the treatment of that, I think, would justifiably be different than what Freddie Freeman's dealing with, because Freeman's a world champ. Ryan, as it stands right now, it seems like he won't be. But also part of what moves an older player out the door in football is the presence of that hard salary cap. In baseball, you just don't have that. So it really is simply a matter of choice. Do you want the more expensive player or the lesser expensive player? And all I'm asking you is just notice that Major League Baseball owners want the less expensive player, and they use analytics as an explanation for why. Just notice that. Randy Hall says Lou Alcindor turned Kareem Abdul-Jabbar the greatest college player of all time. I mean, he's certainly up there for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That's obviously, before me, but certainly up there for sure. Keith Fold says, he said, I was there for Maravich. I said, I don't remember UGA students carrying him off the court. I'm not saying it didn't happen. He certainly put on a show. It's one of those things where, like, maybe it's not true, but it should be true, or at least if it's not true, you don't want to know because of it kind of ruins the story. But yeah, that's kind of one of those things that just kind of gets grown. Kind of grows in your time. Philip Jordan Wells also bringing up Bill Walton as another one of those great college players. Like, here's one thing I think a lot of young people probably have a hard time coming to grips with. Like, I'm not old enough to know Bill Walton as a player, but obviously a lot of folks know him now as the guy who does the strange things on those Pac-12 broadcasts late night on ESPN. Here's the thing, though, a lot of you younger folks may not realize, that when I was coming of age, early 90s, Bill Walton was the number 2 color analyst for NBC on the NBA. Like as weird as he is now doing this stuff for the Pac-12, that's at least like the 80th college basketball game in a given night. When I was a kid, like late middle school, early high school, Walton was the number 2 broadcast team on the NBA. So all that crazy stuff he's doing on ESPN now, he used to do this on NBC for like, Michael Jordan games or something like that. I mean, typically it would have been like, Marv Albert. But yeah, Steve Snapper Jones and Bill Walton, and I forget who the play-by-play guy was on those broadcasts. But, I mean, he was a very, very big presence on NBA broadcasts when I was a kid, and he was just as weird then as he is now. Randy Hall also brings up David Thompson. Yeah, on any discussion of great college players of all time, David Thompson has to be in that conversation. That is unquestioned. Over here on DawgNation.com for a moment. David A. Thomas says, unpopular pick, but you got to mention Christian Laettner too, and you do. I mean, this time of year, we always bring up the Duke-Kentucky regional final from up there in Philadelphia in 92. I mean, how about Laettner in that game? Obviously, we know the buzzer beater on the long pass from Grant Hill. Do you know that game? 10 of 10 from the field, 10 of 10 from the line. 30 points, did not miss a shot. Not a free throw, not a field goal. It's pretty impressive. And, he was on the 92 Dream Team. And that's a big, big nod to be a part of the greatest team ever assembled. Now, at the time, it was obviously a debate about whether or not Laettner belonged to the team other than, more so than Shaq. But as David A. Thomas says, the Laettner college career kind of speaks for itself. Ohio Dog, how about this? Talk about, pro day today. He says, what would be my 40? He says, how about first in 15 minutes? Yeah. Listen, I don't know that I've ever actually run a 40. And it'd be slow. I mean, it would be so slow. Like, I know that it's the most overdone thing in media. Hey, let's get the the schlubby talkers and let's let them participate in combine events. It's the most tired thing of all time. I know that Darren Rovell did it not too long ago, and others. Everybody's done some version of that. I can promise you. I don't know that anybody would run a slower 40 time than me. And listen, like, I'm very happy to talk about what I can and can't do athletically. There are some things that I'm okay with. Half court basketball, play a little 3-on-3. I'm gonna hold my own in a situation like that. There are plenty of things that I just can't do. And I'm talking about on my best day. When I was 17 years old, I was slow as molasses. I really was. Dogs on Top checks in to say, thank you for all you do. And the DawgNation staff there as well. Work's been crazy lately. I've been in every state in the Southeast and Midwest the last 2 weeks. Boy, that's an amazing schedule. This is currently being held here in Ohio. Your show brings much needed entertainment and encouragement. Dogs on Top, that is awesome to hear. Thank you so much for saying that. You have no idea how much that means to me. And that was always my vision for this show, is that relationship that can form, because you can listen to this anytime you want to. Checking in live or anything else. At first it was only the audio, but it became video after that because, listen, I know what it feels like, especially at different times in my life, to be just running around being busy, doing a bunch of stuff. And sometimes it's stuff you want to do and sometimes it's stuff you don't really want to do. But having some sort of audio to keep me company through all of that was always something I was very glad to have. And to think that I'm able to provide that for somebody else, I can promise you, that is what I want the story of my life to be. It really is. Just to be able to keep people company while they're exercising. Some people love to exercise, some people don't. But to be able to give you what you need to get through that, or keep you company while you're driving, keep you awake, keep them falling asleep. Some people actually say they put the show in so they do fall asleep. Listen, whatever you do, I'm happy. I'm happy for however. That means the world to me. Ohio Dog, that's awesome to hear. Great to hear. He says, I legitimately look forward to tuning in each morning. That's such a nice thing to hear. BA's listening face says Roman Harper's breaking down the defense in the SEC network. This is why UGA beat us. That's pretty good stuff there. You love to hear that. All right, a couple more comments and then we're going to go. On YouTube, Tiger Baskins, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. For sure. Jay Shipe says, I got the vertical of the thickness of a credit card. Yeah, so when I was a kid, I mean, honestly, like, everybody has like their like what ifs. Like, and my what if is like, I did love sports when I was younger, but I did not take my own personal sports performance nearly as serious as maybe I could have. And sometimes I wonder, well, what if I went back and like really try to be in good shape and just try to see how good I could have been? Because like the thing I always wanted to do was, like, I'm a huge basketball fan. I did play basketball in high school, but not at a very high level or anything like that. But you see the guys, a lot of high school kids, dunk, grab the rim, stuff like that. I couldn't come close to doing that. But I would have loved to have been able to. Now listen, you get me on an 8-foot goal, even now, I'll still throw that down, but not the 10-foot. A lot of times I'll take my kids over to the gym near our house, and my daughter's only 6, so they'll kind of lower the goal down for her. But when nobody's looking, I'll take full advantage of the lower goal because I still like doing that. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, if Brock beats Carson for QB2, do you think he'll transfer? I just hope he doesn't go home to those lousy, stinking Gators. I would say that Georgia's going to lose a transfer quarterback eventually. Now, how long can they prolong it to prevent it from happening? That seems to be a little bit of a strategy that a lot of programs are using. But eventually, Georgia's losing a quarterback. And the guy that's not number 2 probably is the one that's thinking about going somewhere else. And obviously Carson Beck has been most frequently mentioned in a discussion like this because he's been here the longest, and he's the guy that would seemingly be in the biggest hurry to find out what he is as a player. But you got to think about this, though. You say, well, I don't want him to go home to Florida. This is one of the things I think is really interesting about the transfer quarterback situation right now, is that, well, if you go to Florida, there's a lot of quarterbacks at Florida there too. And it's the same thing at Auburn, where Okay, so TJ Finley transfers to Auburn. And then right after that, not right after that, but shortly after that, Zach Calzada does the same thing. Then they bring in Robbie Ashford, who's not seemingly right now much a part of that competition. But at one point in time, we were talking about Robbie Ashford on this show as a pretty big recruit. Hasn't really played much, but that's another quarterback they bring in. I think this is the danger for quarterbacks right now, which is, and let's say, just for the sake of conversation, let's just say it's Carson Beck. Like, if you transfer to go somewhere else, you got to be careful that you don't burn your one-time transfer to exit a place with a bunch of quarterbacks to end up in another place that also ends up having a bunch of other quarterbacks. Because that's kind of what seems like is going on now, where a lot of programs are taking multiple transfer quarterbacks. I just think that, and a lot of you know I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, but I just think that as the portal is being utilized, I think it's starting to benefit the programs more and more and benefit the players less and less. I just don't think there's a very large handful of players that's actually in a position to gain from the portal. Now, listen, if you're not playing at Georgia, you're going to try your hand somewhere else. But you get one of these, and we're about to have a whole bunch of people who burned that one-time transfer who look around and realize they're not playing their new school either, and now they're going to be left to say, well, what do I do now? And I don't know how the rules are going to handle that at the time, but, it's like – it's kind of like me with a couple of dollars in my pocket, just burning a hole in my pocket. I can't wait to spend it. There are a lot of people who've shown they could not wait to spend that free one-time transfer either. And I don't know, man. I don't know. Just make sure the grass is greener. Let's see what else. Jonathan Ayers says if Carson did go to the Gators, he would be the best one there. So yeah, maybe so. Maybe that would be the case. Robert Barnes still pretty high on Carson Beck. It sounds like he certainly gets his chance to show that here during spring practice. Can't wait to see what he does there. Some of y'all also having fun with my athleticism. Jay Shipe says I could only dunk a volleyball or a kick or a kickball. Yeah, that was the other thing. Like I couldn't even do that, but I do know what you mean. Like the volleyball and then like the kickball are softer. Volleyball is just smaller in general, but the kickball is softer, so that it's easier to grip. And so easier to grip made it easier to dunk. Also, I used to love those mini balls. Like you get me on like an 8.5 with a true mini basketball. I could bring the house down with that. Not always, I wasn't exactly Vince Carter. I was a little bit more like a Shaquille O'Neal style dunk, just as hard as I possibly could, for sure. All right. Final comments. Back on Facebook. Some of you have two-screen experiences going on with Pro Day on one screen, our show on the other, so I appreciate you being here with us. Thanks for that. London Perry says, I see the huge upside with Brock. I mean, I have to say I've always been very intrigued by Brock Vandagriff. And I would say I'm intrigued with Brock in comparison to almost any quarterback, including ones that are not yet on Georgia's roster, if you get my drift. There is something about Brock Vandagriff that I'm just really intrigued by. And listen, that's not me saying he's a can't-miss prospect because I don't pretend to be a scout. But there is a lot about Vandagriff that I've always been really intrigued by. Bill Sanders says Trayvon Walker's doing work. Very little surprise there in that. Very little surprise there in that. And in the case of Walker, I think it's really cool when a player who, like say in Jordan Davis's case, outperforms his recruiting ranking. But there is also something really cool when a sure thing, when that bet actually cashes. Like that's a cool thing there as well. When a guy like Walker, who I looked at as a member of the class 2019, said, hey, if you give me 2% of his future earnings, I'll burn every dollar I currently have. I mean, that's really cool too. When a guy turns out to be every bit as good as you thought he could be. All right, we're gonna get ready to go for today. So good stuff. Thanks for being here. Online for our RS Andrews cool down. Our friends at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. You just need to find them online at rsandrews.com for all of that. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We talked a little bit about the Falcon situation with Deshaun Watson. How real is that? Or what's going on with Freddie Freeman? You can do all of that there as well. It is all out there for you. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Plenty to check out there when it comes to the AJC. Also, state assemblies going on right now. You know, the legislature. So there's some new laws out there related to marijuana and some stuff related to the election, all that kind of stuff. You can read that online at AJC.com there as well. And just big stuff. Our buddy Chip's got some stuff there on the dogs too. So all of it online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. You have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. It is DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.